G'day, and welcome to the latest edition of Emerging Meta in Warhammer Age of Sigmar. I am the coach, and this video is brought to you in partnership with AOS Reminders. I'll be using their data to deep dive into the most popular list choices during the month of March 2020. The Emerging Meta series uses predictive analytics to help you better understand the trends that you are likely to see on the gaming table soon, and through those trends we're going to highlight elements that you may want to incorporate into your own list building, but at the same time help you better understand your opponents by exposing their most popular list choices. The data is generated by players like you who are building their lists in AOS Reminders. So without further ado, let's look at the meta and look what's driving the meta in Age of Sigmar during March. Whoa, March. Didn't that certainly blindside us? We saw the release of the SERAPHON Battle Tome, where they got a new update. It's the second iteration of this book, as well as some FAQs, which has been mostly well received. They've been building lists, people getting excited to putting those post FAQ armies on the table to hit the tournament scene, and then everything stopped with this, not a purple sun, it's COVID. I probably don't need to explain a bit more about COVID and the impacts that it's had on the tournament scene. Specifically, we've seen suspensions and cancellations from South Coast GT, Adepticon, Warhammer Fest. They're just a few of the many events that have been either cancelled or postponed. And while I was fortunate enough to sneak into a 50-player event in March, the physical distancing has really been challenging for everyone in the hobby. So I have no doubt in my mind that we're going to rise as a phoenix coming out of the ashes of this pandemic. But the great thing as well is looking, at the glass half full, that people are clearing out their backlogs of overdue projects, and they're taking their time to paint without deadlines for the tournament. So when you look at some of the things that are happening out, like these online hobby hangouts that are happening on Discord and Skype, by the way, I will leave the link to my Discord in the show description. It's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of this COVID post era of our hobby. People may have had an army that's been sitting on their backlog for some time now, whether it's a Slaanesh, whether it's a Khorne, whether it's a Stormcast Eternals, how the meta is going to change come the General's Handbook 2020, looking at some of the new factions that are coming out. It's going to be really interesting to see how the meta is going to shift and adapt over the next couple of months. Who knows when it's all going to restart. But the good thing is people are still building the list. People are still very excited. And we're starting to see some events happening on Tabletop Simulation, which is more of a digital game, and people are playing Age of Sigmar there. So just a couple of quick game changes. We had some things happening in the White Dwarf as well. But certainly the new SERAPHON Battle Tome is going to hit the mark sometime soon. And who knows what the world's going to look like post-COVID. When we look at the month of March, there was 4,331 lists generated in AOS Reminders, which is approximately 30% lower than previous months, though it is expected in the current climate. Of the lists that were generated during the month of March, the most popular allegiances were the SERAPHON at 437 lists, the Stormcast Eternals at 345, Nighthaunt at 230, OSSIARCH BONEREAPERS 217, Ogre Moor Tribes at 215, Cities of Sigmar 205, Khorne, Slaves to Darkness, Nurgle, Gloomspite GITZ, Legions of Nagash. This month I've done something a little bit differently. Instead of having the list separated between Legions of Grief, Legions of Blood, Legion of Night, I've combined them all just to be Legions of Nagash. We've also had the Tzeentch, we've had Sylvaneth, Skaven, Ironjaws, Flesh Eater Courts, Kharadron Overlords, Slaanesh, Big Waaagh, and Idoneth Deepkin. When we look at, that fat middle, obviously we've got SERAPHON and Stormcast in that almost 400 or 400 plus mark. A lot of the other armies are kind of sitting around that 150 to 200 mark, which is an interesting fat middle. It's probably what we expect. we've seen over the last couple of months there has been a rising popularity and a consistent popularity with some of the hot new armies, whether it's the OSSIARCH BONEREAPERS, the Ogre Maw Tribes, the Cities of Sigmar, the Auric War Clans. But we're also seeing some really interesting things. We're seeing the GLOOMSPITE GITZ and the Legions of NAGASH slowly coming back. Tzeentch kind of has dropped off a little bit. Who knows what's going on there? But we've also seen some things like Skaven. We've seen the Big Warg, the Idoneth Deepkin. All of these different armies kind of finding their mark. The biggest army that probably is sitting out here right now, but it is reflective of the meta, is the Daughters of Cain, where while they are very competitive right now, and they still are competitive, people aren't quite running them, and they're a little bit of a unicorn in the tournament scene. Between the top 10 factions here, from SERAPHON all the way, count yourself down to 10, I think it hits the Nurgle or the Slaves to Darkness. It contributes to about 51% of the list, total list generated during the month. So it is quite interesting to see that some of the newer armies are still the most popular, but there are still some nuggets like the GLOOMSPITE GITZ, which are still coming out even though that book is well over 12 months old. When we look at some of the more popular list choices, as always, we start at the Realms of Origin. And we can see of the seven realms that are available for selection, we see that Shyish and Akshi continue to remain the top realms of battle. However, the gap between first, second, third, and fourth is continuing to shrink, and we're seeing that Gur and Gairan are not far behind. They're actually really close. So, you know, there's probably a top 4 out of the top 7. So Shyish coming in at 21.8, Akshi coming in at 19.5, Gur is coming in at 15.5, Gairan 15.1, and then we kind of go into the lower figures where it's Hish at 10.2, Shimon at 9.2, and then Ulgu at 8.6. So when we look at it, as always, we know that most armies, other than say the Cities of Sigmar, is driven by the artifact choice. The Cities of Sigmar are locked into 1 or 2 of the different realms depending on which city you play in. So we're seeing that artifacts are continuing to drive the realms of battle for selection, and many of the top realms of battle artifacts continue to remain consistent. But as always, we continue to have new entries in the top 3 by realm. So the new entries to the top 3 is the Smouldering Helm, the Argent Armor, the Gilden Blade, the Sepultural Plate, and the Mismatic Blade. I've probably butchered some of them, but well, let's continue. So what do some of these things do? The Smouldering Helm, during the combat phase, each save of a 6+ deals 1 mortal wound to the attacker. The Argent Armor is -1 to melee hit rolls targeting the bearer. The Gilden Blade blocks enemy artifacts of power within 3 inches. The Sepultural Plate negates wounds on a 6+, and the Mismatic Blade pick 1 melee weapon, and the attacks that target the bearer get a -1 to hit. So we're starting to see a couple of debuffs. We've got the 2 artifacts there that are going to give you a -1 to hit. We've also seen another defense artifact there, the Gilden Blade, that's going to block some of those really powerful artifacts if you're within 3 inches of the bearer. So when we look at some of the breaking up between the offensives of defensive artifacts still remain the most popular, because we've got not only those ones that I just mentioned, whether it was going to be the Smouldering Helm, which is doing a mortal wound back, the Argent Armor, or the Mismatic Blade, which is going to do the -1 to hit, the ignoring mortal wounds on a 6+ from the Sepultural Plate. But we've also got the Ethereal Amulet, the Griffeather Charm, Ignac Scales, Doppelganger Cloak, and the Ragged Cloak. I think the Lens of Reflection might be on there. The Lens of Reflection is still there from Hish. All of those artifacts are very defensive artifacts. So it looks like we probably don't need the big movement buffs or the big offensive buffs. There is a couple in there, the Gaia Strikes, the Swords of Judgment, the Rune Blades, but ultimately people are going with more defensive artifacts to keep those heroes on the board longer or to upset the opponent. Aether Quartz Brooch, which is that utility-based artifact that allows you to generate command points, still remains popular. So how do these artifacts stack up against the allegiances that are taking them? Well, we can see here that when we look at some of the most popular realms and where the allegiance is coming in, we can see that Gur, the top 3 armies coming from Gur, is the GLOOMSPITE GITZ, SERAPHON, and Flesh Eater Courts. Gairan, you can see the cities of Sigmar, Sylvaneth, and Nurgle. Akshi is going to be again cities of Sigmar, SERAPHON, and Fireslayers. Shimon is going to be the Slaves to Darkness, Caradron Overlords, and Skaven. Shish is going to be Ogre Maw Tribes, OSSIARCH Bonereapers, and NIGHTHAUNT. Ulgu is Slaves to Darkness, Skaven, and Idoneth Deepkin. And finally, Hish is going to come from the NIGHTHAUNT, the Flesh Eater Courts, and SERAPHON. Now, when you start to kind of pause for a minute and you maybe go back to one particular slide where I showed you some of the most popular artifacts, and then look at the armies that are taking them, you might just start connecting the dots to see again, you know, the Aether Quartz Brooch, for example, coming in from Hish. We can see that things like NIGHTHAUNT are an army that really wants those command points. You know, Flesh Eater Courts again is very command point hungry, especially if you start looking at something like Grizzlegore. There's probably a lot you can unpack here, but think about your own armies, thinking about what your opponent's armies can do. The trends start to emerge. When we look at some of the most popular artifacts chosen during the month of March, again, no surprise, the bone armor, the god bone armor coming from Petrifix Elite, the ethereal amulet continues to remain popular, but we do have some other ones coming up, and they're a rather surprise, funnily enough. We've got the Godforged Blade and the Soul Thief, which are both coming out of Stormcast Eternal. So what that probably tells me is that these 2 sub-allegiances, and we'll talk a bit more about this later, is that there's probably 2 sub-allegiances right now from Stormcast Eternals that are really hitting the mark. If you don't know what the Godbone armor is by now, it is a mandatory requirement from the OSSIARCH Bonereapers. I won't dig in a little bit deeper, but just know that it ignores the first wound allocated to the bearer in every phase. Super powerful. Petrifix Elite is very popular right now. Not as popular as it has been. People are exploring some other areas there of the Bonereapers, but long story short, no surprise, that continues to remain at the top. The Aether Quartz Brooch, as I mentioned, is a malign sorcery artifact that is available to everybody, and that allows you to spend a command point, and then on a 5+, you get to bring that command point back. So it's a great way of bringing back command points, especially if you're able to generate more of them. And there are some other ways you can generate more command points depending on which army you're in. The Stormcast Eternals have got that Godforged Blade, which is coming out of the Hammers of Sigmar sub-allegiance, that upgrades one of the hero's melee weapons to hit, so basically when they roll a 6+, it's going to do +1 damage. While the other artifact there, the Stormcast Eternals Soul Thief, is coming from the hammers, the anvils of Helden Hammer, and what that does is it allows you to deal a mortal wound on a 3+ to any enemy model that is wounded but failed to kill. So not very good against hordes, given that you're likely to kill a 1 wound model. However, when we start looking at things with 2 or more wounds and you don't slay it on that 3+, you're going to have a great ability to deal an additional mortal wound. Some of the other artifacts there we might want to call out is things like, SERAPHON have the Inviscerating Blade, which is very popular right in, I think it's about the 7th or 8th choice there. I'm calling that out because SERAPHON is a new battle tome and maybe one that you want to get across. And this particular artifact is you choose one of the melee weapons, unmodified hit rolls of 6, deal 2 mortal wounds in addition to normal damage, which is pretty brutal when you think about putting that onto a melee attack that might already do 2 or 3 damage. Other artifacts you might want to call out is things like the Shroud of Warpfire coming out of Tzeentch. Another one that's identified through a sub-allegiance, so the Internal Conflagration. And what it does is when allocating a wound or a mortal wound to the hero that's bearing the Shroud of Warp Flame, on a roll of a d6, on a roll of a 3+, the attacking unit suffers a mortal wound. So a nice way to rebound some damage for anyone who's attacking this particular bearer. Some of the other artifacts that are coming out of the realms or coming out of battle tomes, you've got the Beacon of NAGASH coming out of NIGHTHAUNT, which is very popular. I mentioned the Inviscerating Blade from SERAPHON. We've got the Frozen Kernel coming out of Sylvaneth. Brand of the Svard coming out of the Ogre Moor Tribes. We've got the Pendant of the Fairwind coming out of NIGHTHAUNT. The Splatter Cleaver coming out of the Ogre Moor Tribes. I've just mentioned the Shroud of Warp Flame coming out of Tzeentch. The Skull Shard Mantle coming out of Khorne. The Fusel of Conflagration coming out of SERAPHON. The Staff of Inocular... I'm going to butcher. The Krunkaradin Overlords. Optimization. The Thronebreaker Talk coming out of Khorne. The Sunblessed Armor out of Ironjaws. And then the Clammy Cowl coming out of GLOOMSPITE GITZ. So there are top 20 artifacts when we look at some of the different allegiances, as well as what's being picked out of Malign Sorcery. Which, speaking of Malign Sorcery, here are the top 4 artifacts that were chosen specifically from the realm. So this is ignoring the artifacts that are coming out of the battle tome. And then the top 4 artifacts here that are coming out of Malign Sorcery is the Ethereal Amulet, the Aether Quartz Brooch, the Griffeather Charm, and the Thermal Rider Cloak. When we drilled down to see who is taking them, the Ethereal Amulet is being chosen by the Ogre Moor Tribes, the Ironjaws, and the Big Warg. So probably no surprise. Again, they're going on things like Stonehorns, they're going on things like Maw Crushers. These big beat sticks that probably already have a 3+ armor save, putting them so they can't be rendered, makes them just a whole lot harder to take down. So great choice, and Vampire Lords on Zombie Dragons are a nice touch, but they're certainly not in the top 3. The Aether Quartz Brooch coming out of Hysh was chosen by NIGHTHAUNT, Flesh Eater Courts, and Legions of Grief. I've already mentioned those armies are very command point heavy, hungry, and if your army is really hungry for command points, you just can't get enough, the Aether Quartz Brooch is a great artifact for you. The Griffeather Charm coming out of Gur was chosen by the Gloomspite GITZ, the Flesh Eater Courts, and Skaven. Things like your Mangler Squigs, things like your Terrorgeist, or your Ghoul King on Terrorgeist or Zombie Dragon is a great person to get that Griffeather Charm, to get the increase to movement, but more importantly the minus to hit against them. Finally, the Thermal Rider Cloak, which is going to increase the movement and make something fly. Slaanesh continues to be the army that loves the Thermal Rider Cloak the most. Who isn't scared of a Flying Keeper of Secrets? Things like Flying Stonehorns from the Ogre Moor Tribes as well. And in the cities of Sigmar, a great example to take that would be the Hurricanum, which allows you to jump over your chaff lines and get it to move around where you need it to be. Because one of those easy things to get bogged down by not being able to move around. So the Thermal Rider Cloak is great to help there. When we look at some of the most chosen endless spells during the month of March, we can see the Veilwind Vortex, the Prismatic Palisades, the Chronomatic Cogs, and the Chalice from the Flesh Eater Courts are the top 4. But we do have a whole bunch of others, whether it's the Hexgorger Skulls and the Wraith Axe from Khorne. We've got the Nightmare Predator and the Bone Tithe Shrieker from the OSSIARCH Bonereapers. Everblaze Comet from the Stormcast Eternals, the Glade Worm from Sylvaneth, the Warp Lightning Vortex from Skaven, are just to name a few when it comes out of the top artifacts. Looking at some of the top 4, we've got the Veilwind Vortex, which you probably know is the very first endless spell that we all got. One that's not on the shelf at the moment, but is still very popular. But why it's popular, why it's on the top, is because the wizard on the Veilwind can cast or attempt to cast an additional spell in their hero phase, and in addition you get to add 6 inches to the range of any spell that wizard casts, and they get +1 to their armor save. So, you know, for a single caster, you put it on top, it's a double caster, and you get to extend the range by 6 inches. That is a very, very attractive endless spell, and it's cheap as chips. The Prismatic Palisade is one that hasn't really featured in the top 4 or the top 10 for maybe since I've done these videos, you know, almost 5 months now. But it's really interesting one because I use this a lot with my GLOOMSPITE kits. And the Prismatic Palisade, if you haven't looked at the War Scroll lately, what it allows you to do is the model, you can't see behind the Prismatic Palisade unless you fly. You draw an imaginary straight line that is 1 millimeter kind of wide, and it allows you to really block line of sight, so it's perfect to protect some of your heroes. Although you do need to watch out because at the start of the turn you do have to roll a dice for any model within 6 inches of it, and on a 5+ you subtract 1 from hit rolls from the people that got affected. So it is a really great spell. It's a nice little long endless spell as well, so it's a nice way to block up certain parts of the board, and more importantly, you know, the sugar on top is going to be the minus to hit if you get that 5+. I think it's 6+, but 5+ if you're playing in the realm of Hish. Chronomatic cogs, as always, you can speed up time to get yourself +2 to movement, or you can slow down time to get an additional spell and re-roll your failed armor saves. Always super popular. And then the Flesh Eater Quartz one is going to allow you to basically, you track all of the wounds that are dealt, all the models actually that have been slain within 12 inches of the artifact, of the endless spell. And at the end of the turn, you roll a dice for each of the models that were slain within 12. And then for every 4+ you roll, you get to heal a wound allocated to a Flesh Eater Quartz model within 12. Or you get to return 1 slain model. So that has a wound characteristic of 1. So it's a great way to bring back your ghouls, or more importantly, and often seen in things like Grizzlegore, it's a great way to heal your Terrorgeists, or even some of those 4 wound flayers or horrors. When we look and drill down a little bit further into see who is taking the top 4 endless spell choices from Malign Sorcery or Forbidden Power, so the ones that are basically available for everyone, we can see the Balewind Vortex, Prismatic Palisades, Chronomatic Cogs, and the Geminids are the 4 most popular choices. Who's taking the Balewind Vortex? It's the Ogre Moor tribes, likely putting a Butcher on top. Tzeentch, a lot of great wizards to go onto that Balewind Vortex. They're going to love an additional 6 inches. And then finally SERAPHON. It's almost like every Slann comes with the Balewind Vortex. They are 2 peas in a pod. Although you do have to pay for them, you don't get a free one in the new Battle Tome. It's almost like every SERAPHON player doesn't leave home without a Balewind Vortex. The Prismatic Palisade, who's taking them? Tzeentch, so I mentioned earlier, great way to block up the board, you know, let alone there's already going to be blocking up some good stuff when it comes to your horrors, but then you can block it up even further with the Prismatic Palisade. The GLOOMSPITE GITZ and the Cities of Sigmar are also taking it. Chronomatic Cogs coming out of NIGHTHAUNT, GLOOMSPITE GITZ and your SERAPHON. So your GLOOMSPITE GITZ is probably from a squeak point of view, while your NIGHTHAUNT is probably going to be moving around those ghosty boys. Looking to increase that 10-inch charge to on a 10 up or 10 plus, you can attack immediately in the charge phase. So the NIGHTHAUNT will definitely want that. And SERAPHON potentially if you're going down more of like a Carnosaur kind of route. Your Geminids are going out of your Tzeentch, your Cities of Sigmar, and your Nurgle. Who doesn't love Geminids, whether it's going to be -1 to hit or -1 to attack characteristic? A good choice overall. Although the better choice now is coming out of SERAPHON, who can choose a bounded endless spell, which means that the predatory spell can't come against you. So if only my armies had a bound endless spell, I would love that. Drilling a little bit further into the allegiance specific data, I have skipped over a little bit. I'm a little bit conscious that the tournament scene isn't quite as it used to be, but I have kind of fleshed it out a little bit later. So I'll only focus here on the chosen battalions. And the most chosen battalions during the month of March were going to be the Iron Fist, the Lords of the Lodge, the Chain Guard, the Change Host. They were the top 4. But we've also got things like the Ard Fists and the Iron Fist coming out of the Iron Jaws / Big Warg. Chain Guard, Shroud Guard, and the Dolores Guard, all coming out of NIGHTHAUNT. Your Change Host from Tzeentch, your Squig Rider Stampede from GLOOMSPITE GITZ, your Blight Cyst from Nurgle, your Supreme Saborites from Slaanesh, your Gore Pilgrims and your Tyrants of Blood from Khorne, your Grunstock Escort Wing coming out of Kharadron Overlords, your Earl Badge, your Gormand, and your Butcher's Band coming out of your Ogre Maw Tribes, your Cleansing Phalanx coming out of Stormcast Eternals, your Shadow Strike Star Host, and your Thunderquake Temple Host coming out of SERAPHON, and then finally your Dead Watch coming out of Flesh Eater Court. So what are a couple of these things? So let's start maybe at Chain Guard, something that you haven't seen maybe for a while. It is a NIGHTHAUNT battalion, and it requires you to take a Guardian of Souls and 2 units of Chainwrath Hordes. And what it's going to allow you to do is that the Guardian of Souls is going to be able to bring back 2d6 worth of models when it comes to those Chainwraths. So when you cast Spectral Lure, so Spectral Lure is going to bring back d6. This is going to allow you to bring back 2d6. So that's pretty good, especially when you're running a big block of Chainwraths. But then it kind of gets even better when you start pairing that up with one of the artifacts, like the Beacon of Nagashazar, which allows you to then do 2d6 plus 3. So, you know, it's kind of bringing up your average to about, on average, 10 additional bodies back every turn, which is pretty crazy. I think it casts on a 6 as well. The Blight Cyst coming out of Nurgle requires you to take a Lord of Blights and then at least 3 units of Blight Kings. I think it allows you to take up to 6, but minimum you've got to take 3 units of Blight Kings. And what it's going to do is the Blight Kings are going to gain Rend -1. And then all the Blight Kings within 3 inches of that Lord of Blight can shoot their Death Hands as well. So it's pretty crazy. It does allow you to ignore cover for your opponent, but you know, Rend -1 on all the Blight Kings is super sexy. Then add the additional abilities that have come out of Nurgle from the Wrath of the Everchosen, and it does mean the Blight Kings are coming up Millhouse when it comes to Nurgle. The Cleansing Phalanx from Stormcast Eternals requires 2 units of Evocators, either on foot or mounted on Dracolines, and then 2 units of Sequitors, which allows the Evocators to cast in power on the Sequitors, and which allows basically the Sequitors to re-roll all their hits in addition to their wound rolls, which really makes them both a hammer and an anvil type unit. The last battalion I'll talk about is one of my personal favourites. I am a GLOOMSPITE GITZ player, and I will talk about them a little bit later in this episode. And that is the Squig Rider Stampede, which is a GLOOMSPITE GITZ, and it requires you to take 2 to 3 units of either Squig Hoppers or Boingrot Bounders, and you can take optionally a Mangler Squig, although it has to be the non-hero version. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to re-roll the movement characteristic. And that's really important because Squigs have a random movement. Your Squig Hoppers have a 3d6. Your Boingrot Bounders have a 2d6 movement. And nothing sucks more when you roll like a 3 or a 4 on a movement of basically a glass cannon. These guys don't have the best armor save in the world, and they want to get into your face ASAP. So that is a really good battalion. And then if you're lucky enough to have the Bad Moon hitting them, you're going to be able to run and charge. Something that I did last month that I really enjoyed, that I'm going to continue to do and maybe expand upon it, is going to be some regional insights. So looking at some of the world's favorite unit choices, because it is quite interesting to see the meta and how it changes across regions. And does it actually cross regions? You know, is there pockets of brilliance in different communities, or are we all experiencing the same competitive tournament lists? So when we look at some of the most favorite list choices and the unit choices, you can see the Chainwrath Horde is most popular right now in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. Potentially some 3 of the largest communities in Age of Sigmar. You can see the Mortek Guard coming out of Canada and Spain. I almost called you Canada. The Sequitors coming out of Germany. The Boingrot Bounders, mad representation from the Netherlands. The Chaos Sorcerer Lord, fascinating to come out of France. Why that particular unit out of, let's say, a battle line choice? was super interesting to me. And it seems like Khorne has really made his mark in Belgium, where not only they're enjoying waffles, but they're enjoying slaughter priests. So fascinating to see some of those unit choices across regions. And then when it comes to those endless spells, you know, boom, boom, boom. We've got the Balewind Vortex coming out of United States, United Kingdoms, Canada, Australia, Germany, and Spain. So probably not only a great choice for SERAPHON and Tzeentch players, but almost every army can benefit from it. You know, put a butcher up there from the Ogre Moor tribes, get one of your little casters or your fungoid cave shaman, get an endless spell happening. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the Balewind. And as I mentioned, I think it's 40 points from memory. Cheapest chips. The Hex Gorgeous Skulls coming out of Belgium. We do know that Slaughter Priest was coming out of Belgium. So again, no surprise to see more Khorne blessings happening in Belgium. And then finally, the Glade Worm coming out of Norway. Oh, and the Chalice coming out of Sweden as well. Our Flesh Eater Court's friends. Don't forget about the Chalice. When it comes to the world's favourite artifacts, we can see that the Godbone armour is favourite for the United States, Canada and Spain. The Ethereal Amulet is most popular in United Kingdom, Australia and France. We have the Godforged Blade, the Stormcast one, coming out of Germany. The Pendant of the Fairwind coming out of Sweden. And one that was really interesting, one that I wasn't expecting, but mad props to Norway, which was the 1001 Dark Blessings, which is a Daughters of Cain artifact. So curious to see. We didn't really see a strong representation of Daughters of Cain in the meta, but it looks like Norway might be leading the charge on behalf of Cain. The last thing we're going to tackle is the top 5, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. I know, we've obviously got this COVID world, and the tournament scene has grounded to a halt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the top 3 or the top 4 different armies, but I've got 2 little gems at the end. So I'm actually going to do a top 6. I've given you a little bonus in there. It's like I feel like I'm on like the sales network. So let's begin. Let's look at the SERAPHON, and let's look at them because they had the highest list generation at 437 lists generated. If you are a SERAPHON player, feel free to pause this video right now, take a screenshot so you can see what those top choices are. But there are a couple of quick call outs that I will make. The first one I'll make is that there seems to be a good mixture between Skinks and Saurus selection. Now in the old SERAPHON battle tome, you probably wouldn't be caught dead running anything that had to do with Saurus. Very a Warhammer Fantasy Battle unit. However, they've waited their time in the sun 2-3 years, and finally Saurus are great again. So there is a good mixture, whether you like your Skinks, whether you like your Saurus, you want a bit of both. So great to see there, things like the Saurus Knights. Whoever would have thought Saurus Knights would be back as a unit selection? So go through the list, you can see a good mixture there. The most popular Starborn battalion was the Shadow Strike Starhost, which allows you to deep strike any of the units that have to be in the battalion, which is the Star Priest or the Skink Priest, the 2 units of Skinks or Chameleon Skinks, and the unit of Pterodons or Ripidactyls. So instead of putting them on the table, you can put them on reserve and bring any of them on from the side of the board. So obviously look at the rules to see where exactly you need to put them in, but great little ability. On the other side of the build, so when you're building a SERAPHON, you either build the Starborn or the Coalesced, and if you are going down the Coalesced route, the battalion that most stands out is the Thunderquake Temple Host, which allows you in the hero phase to declare the battalion will be swift or savage. And if you choose it to be swift, until the next hero phase, units from this battalion can run and still shoot or charge in the same turn. If you choose savage, until the next hero phase, you add 1 to the attack characteristic of melee weapons from units in the battalion. So super sweet, no matter which way you want to build, whether you want to build swift or savage, that Coalesce has something a little bit for everyone. The The Kotal's Claw seems to be the most popular sub-allegiance, which gives them a +1 to the hit rolls for attacks made by their friendly Saurus units that have made a charge in the same turn. So it's also going to allow you to get a 4+ command point generation, and the artifact's going to generate 2 additional mortal wounds in addition to anything when you roll a 6. And we did talk about that in the artifacts choices. A few other things to call out is you should probably expect to see a lot of the Comet's Call. It's the most popular spell choice there, and that's because it comes attached with the Slann Star Master. The Comet's Call casts on a 7, and if successfully cast, and they do have some really cool ways to cast spells, some very strong ways to cast spells, you get to pick D3 different units that are anywhere on the battlefield. So if I was a Seraphon player, I'm likely to be doing this against heroes and bringing down those heroes ASAP. But basically, you pick D3 different units anywhere on the board, and then they suffer D3 mortal wounds. So you roll separately, and then if you roll a 10+, so again, put it on a Balewind, get a Chronomantic Cogs. Finding a way to either increase the spell cast or more spells. If you roll a 10+, you are going to be able to do that on D6 different units instead of D3. So those 5 wound, 4 wound, 6 wound heroes could be deleted within 2 turns. Pretty crazy stuff. You finally got the Balewind Vortex. We talked about it being popular in the old and the new book. Look at some of the artifacts, those bound endless spells. So you're probably wondering, what is a bound Geminids, or what is a bound Emerald Lifeswarm or Purple Sun? It just means, because it's a predatory spell, they pay a little bit extra. But what it means is you don't get to control that when we go back to moving around endless spells. So if I throw out a Geminids and it's bound, it means you can't throw it back against me. So I think it's like 10 points or 20 points extra. Very good, worthy investment from the Seraphon there to make sure that doesn't come back to you. Next up will be the Stormcast Eternals, who are certainly making a resurgence over the last 2 months. So a few couple of call outs that I'll make there is that the endless spell choices, Everblaze Comet is talked about a lot, but the Celestian Vortex and the Dias Arcanum endless spells are seeing a resurgence, or people are starting to pick them up. Why would people want to take these particular two endless spells? Well, first off, the Dias is a wonderful movement spell, so you can put a Stormcast Wizard on there as long as it has, I believe, 6 or less wounds, and it allows you to move around the board, so you can fly, and it's got 12 inches. So great way for a wizard to keep up with maybe your cavalry, your Dracolines, or your Star Drakes, or just generally move around the board. Or the vortex, the vortex with hammers. What it allows you to do is it's very, very similar to the Quicksilver Swords, but it also causes a -1 to shooting when the unit is within 6 inches of the vortex. So if shooting continues to rise in popularity, this is a great choice to make it harder. Your Sequitors and your Evocators are still powerful unit selections when it comes to their combination with the Cleansing Phalanx Battalion. However, that Humbrel, generic, Lonely Liberator that people have maybe forgotten has starting to see come back. They were certainly forgotten about for a long time, but that No Frills Battle Line staple that comes in a lot cheaper than your things like your Sequitors are starting to make a resurgence. So if you haven't dusted your Liberators off for a while, it might be time to revisit them. The Hammers of Sigmar and the Anvils of Heldenhammer are almost tied when it comes to those sub-allegiances, so great to see. Unfortunately, the Celestial Vindicators not quite as popular as maybe those other two, but certainly there are two really strong, depending on which, there's some different benefits here and there. Again, you could nitpick between the two, but they are the two strongest from the Stormcast. Finally, when it comes to spell selection, there's a whole bunch of them that are inbuilt with the War Scrolls. However, the Celestial Blades is ranking in that top 5. That's a spell choice as opposed to something that's coming on the War Scroll. And what that allows you to do is on a cast of a 5+, visible Stormcast units wholly within 18, add 1 to their melee wound rolls until the next hero phase, which is awesome. NIGHTHAUNT coming in 3rd at 230 list selections. It's another army that's getting that resurgence. We saw NIGHTHAUNT players probably move to Legions of Grief for a while, and they're now coming back to pure NIGHTHAUNT. So what drove it? NIGHTHAUNT players, I'd love you to tell me what may have got you back into NIGHTHAUNT as opposed to Legions of Grief. But a few worthy call-outs for those pure NIGHTHAUNT players is you've got that Spirit of Torment and the Knight of Shrouds on a ethereal steed. Seem to be the go-to heroes when it comes to NIGHTHAUNT, but they serve very different purposes. You know, that Spirit of Torment is going to be on the front lines, wanting to generate rerolls to hit rolls of 1 for friendly NIGHTHAUNT units that are wholly within 12 of the friendly Spirit of Torment. While the Knight of Shrouds is a really worthy choice to take the Beacon of Nagashazar to increase the regeneration of units, or even moving around the backfield to manipulate the board. Chronomantic Cogs. I did allude to this a little bit earlier on Chronomantic Cogs, but to reinforce the point, it is a top choice when it comes to NIGHTHAUNT. It is going to give you that additional +2 to movement if you speed up time. And why that's important is because they have an ability called the Wave of Terror, which basically means on a 10+, when you roll a 10+ on the charge, it allows you to immediately fight before you move into the combat phase. So if you're worried about the activation wars, you're worried about Slaanesh on a 2+ stopping you from attacking or making you fight last, this allows you to immediately fight in the charge phase. So getting that to back to basically to a 6+, and then there might be other ways you can bring that down even lower, is super sexy. The last thing I'll call out from a command trait point of view is the Ruler of the Spirit Host seems to be the go-to command trait. And the reason people are taking that is because at the start of the hero phase, you get to return D3 models to a friendly summonable NIGHTHAUNT unit that's within 12 inches of the general. So, people might want to bring back Hex Wraiths or Spirit Host because it is D3 models, not D3 wounds. So those Spirit Hosts, I believe, have 3 wounds apiece. Hex Wraiths have 2, so it means that you're bringing back more wounds, and also those Spirit Hosts can really bog down an opponent. So if you're looking for maximum wound efficiency, you want to bring back those units. 4th most popular choice is the OSSIARCH BONEREAPERS. I'm not going to spend too much time on the OSSIARCH BONEREAPERS. Not a lot has changed when it comes to this army. Petrifex Elite is still dominating. However, when you look at the sub-allegiances and you compare that to previous months where we've talked about them, you can see that the popularity in Petrifex Elite has started to dwindle. Now, whether that is because people are sick of playing Petrifex Elite, whether opponents are complaining about it, or they're just exploring new parts of the book. The Staliarch Lords is a great secondary sub-allegiance, and it probably ties in really nicely. You can see the Death Riders in the unit choices are rising in popularity. They're that cavalry-based unit. So instead of taking your Mortek Guard, you might want to take your Death Riders. The Staliarch Lords is a great complementary to those Death Riders. So having some really high movement cavalry OBR could be worth exploring in 2020. The Artisan Key is a top choice artifact, which isn't being forced by the sub-allegiance. So things like your Godbone armor is forced to you. But the reason I call out the Artisan Key is because what makes it really interesting is that before the before using the Bone Shaper ability, you roll a dice, and on a 4+ you can pick 2 units instead of 1, or you can pick the same unit within 6 inches. So being able to double stack or picking 2 units for the price of 1 is a great reason why you take an artifact. And then the other thing I'll call out here is from a spell choice point of view, things like your Soul Mason. And the Soul Mason, while he's not a spell, he's a unit, he comes with a really attractive spell choice called the Soul Guide, which basically allows a friendly OBR unit to reroll hit rolls of 1. And at the end of the hero phase, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, they can do it again. So if you think about maybe putting a Soul Mason next to 2 of the catapults, the Mortek crawlers, and allowing them to reroll hit rolls of 1, that could be really brutal when they're shooting, quite a distance from the backfield and doing 5 damage apiece. So again, if you're looking to break away from the big blocks of Mortek guard, that might be a nice way, going down the crawler route instead of maybe the Mortek guard, or maybe looking at things like the Death Riders. I did mention we'll do things a little bit differently, and I'm going to pick the not technically in the top 5, but it's a top 5 in my heart, and that is the GLOOMSPITE GITZ. They came in about 10, but the reason we're calling them out is because, hell, GLOOMSPITE GITZ are fun, they're enjoyable, there are people building squigs everywhere, and destruction needs more GITZ. So a couple of call outs that I'll make there is that the GITZ have really shifted away from that grot, endless spell heavy list build into one that's more dominated by squigs. And you can see that when the unit selections come in, you got the Boing Grot Bounders, the Loon Boss on Mangler Squig, the Squig Herd, and there are more squigs that are dominating the top 10 unit choices, where previously you'd be dominated by stabbers, you'd be dominated by a whole range of different GITZ, your fanatics, your Spore Splatter, or your Loon Smasher fanatics. There's been a real shift when it comes to the way you build those GITZ. Because of the squig build, you can see things like the Squig Rider Stampede and the Squiggerlanche are your most popular battalion choices. And then, doubling down on the squig route, you can see things like the Squiglure spell, which allows D3 squigs to run and charge in the same turn, is a very popular spell. So don't have to rely on the Bad Moon to get to allow your squigs to run and charge, because this is going to allow you to do so. Or maybe the Bad Moon's in a different quadrant of the board. And then finally, Fight Another Day, the command trait that's a perfect addition to your Loon Boss on Mangler Squig, coming out of the command traits, because what that allows you to do is each time that the general attacks with its melee weapons, so you can make a 2d6 move after all of its attacks have been resolved. So basically, you charge your Loon Boss on Mangler Squig into combat, do all the damage, and then immediately jump out of combat and move 2d6. So you can either and the great thing is that Loon Bosses on Mangler Squigs fly as well, so you can jump over the backfield so long as you remain more than 3 inches away from your enemy, or you can get yourself out of danger by moving away. So super fascinating addition to the Squig build. The bonus that I said I would give you is the Legions of Nagash, one that people have really forgotten about. I feel sorry about Legions of Nagash. I used to play Legions of Nagash. I'm more of a Manfred lover, but I wanted to put a spotlight on Legions of Nagash because they are still a great army. People aren't playing them as often, but the people who are doing some fantastic things. So what are they doing? So a couple of quick call outs I'll make there is that battalions continue to not be a popular selections when it comes to Legions of Nagash. I know when I was playing Legion of Night, it was very hard to build a battalion because it wasn't the units that I wanted to take. So when you look at the battalions, the one that is most popular is Arkan the Black's Lords of Sacrament. And the primary reason for that is because it's going to allow wizards in the battalion to cast an extra spell so long as they're within range of the Mortis engine. So, Arkan has already got some of the best spell casting in the game, and then you can double down on that by tapping into some of those additional benefits and